Welcome to By-The-Bywater, a podcast on the Megaphonic Network. I'm Ned Raggett.
I'm Oriana Schwint.
I'm Jared Pekacek.
And we're here to talk about all things J.R.R. Tolkien, his work, his inspirations and impact, creative interpretations in other media, languages, lore, rip-offs, parodies, anything we think is interesting. Thanks for joining us. Hello and welcome to the 66th episode of By-The-Bywater. It is great to be back with you all. And, we were just talking about the new addition to Jared's household. So if you want to say a little more about what's come your direction here, literally just an hour ago.
Yeah. No, he had to push recording back for this. I'm so sorry. Yeah, I got a little black cat. Name TBD. I will say, maybe this will, updates next time if this changes, but I'm leaning towards Fuchsia, as in the Gormenghast character, because she has many Fuchsia-like traits.
And this is an encouragement to start reading the Gormenghast books if you haven't already, after you finish the West Passage.
I actually just got the first one from the library, and I'm like 20 pages in, so I'm excited to meet Fuchsia. I haven't met Fuchsia yet, so... She's
great. She's one of my favorite fantasy, or any characters, really. I love her so much.
Indeed.
So little black cat, and if I do name her Fuchsia, I got to get her a red collar.
Yes.
And keep her away from scrawny young men with ambition. So.
Well, you see, now that you're a jacked bro.
Yeah, it's good that you're swole.
You're okay.
Right?
Swollen and you're approaching your middle age.
How dare you? No, I know.
But like...
the truths we get into here on By-The-Bywater.
I am still the youngest one here, though, so...
Damn, that's right. That's right.
Yeah. Lord it over me, you punks. Anyway.
Yeah.
With all that said. So, anyway, let's see. We got stuff to talk about, as per usual, as we're gearing through things. Again, we certainly hope you've read the West Passage by now. Oriana has made a great claim on saying that she'll probably get a tattoo of one of the art pieces in the book, which is a very good idea.
I think I'm going to meld it in with, I have like the white tree of God that is actually black in my tattoo, but I think I want to extend the roots and have that sort of twine together and form like the body of the beast, Jared. I think that would be really cool. So
is this the one you're talking about, the one that's like a map of like interlocking circles?
Probably the map might not make, I don't know, we'll see, but it's great. The art is so good. I love it.
It's true. We encourage you all to get body art based on Jared's art.
Though do ask Jared's permission first. It's good to get permission from the author. It's good to get permission from the actual artist.
I got somebody. So whenever somebody follows me now on like Instagram or whatever, I'm like, this has to be because of the book, right? So I'll go and like snoop on their profile, which means that I keep seeing people like, oh, I loved it, rave review, whatever. But one person followed me today who like gave it like 3.5 stars out of 5, and it was like it started as a 5-star read, and then like I don't know, like it's. The ideal reader for it is probably out there somewhere. I'm just waiting for the hour-long explainer video, and I was like, it's not coming.
Why?
The point is, it doesn't exist. It can't.
I know as much about what's going on as anybody else. Like, it's not supposed to be Dick and Jane. Like, it's...
Well, people engage with it as they do.
It's not that abstract. Like it has its moments, but it's genuinely not that hard to understand. Anyway, not to criticize my readers. I'm appreciative of anybody who takes the time to read it and then comment on it online positively. I'm not appreciating the negative reviews, if any.
It's a reaction. It's all good.
So.
Yeah. Okay. Well, with that said and on the way, we should get into the meat of the episode, which means, as always, we need to get into the news section. So, as ever, Jared, please take it away.
First in the news this time is a reminder that the newest major Tolkien publication is out on September 17th. The 3-volume collected poems edited with notes from noted Tolkien scholars Christina Scull and Wayne Hammond. We have to admit, the hardback presentation and box looked very nice, but as you said before, just trying to figure out a place to even put these anywhere on our shelves is an issue, so maybe we'll admire from afar, or electronically at most. Next, a quick note that the Lord of the Rings musical is starting to expand even more now with the announcement that an Australian production will debut in early 2025. It seems pretty clear that the reinvention of it in 2023 in the UK has now fully started to take off. Whether this will eventually mean a Broadway run or if it will be more of a traveling spectacle in various locations is unclear, but we'll see where time takes us. Otherwise, deep sigh. Almost everything there is to talk about this month is unsurprisingly about the return of the Rings of Power. By the time this episode is available, the first 3 episodes of the second season will be available as well, and we'll all have thoughts together, we guess, or anguished screaming. We can note right now that the 2 final trailers, one tied in with Comic-Con and one a couple of weeks later, have appeared, along with a variety of featurettes and more promo and so forth. Frankly, this just makes us think even more that they're all, we gotta spend our way to success, but far be it from us, your kind-hearted hosts, to be overly cynical about these things. We are gentle and pure.
Truly, truly. We will rise above it, even though nearly every frame of those trailers...
Nails on a freaking chalkboard.
Yeah, they also, released a song about...
the Tom Bombadil song,
The Tom
Bombadil song.
And it doesn't really sound like a Tom Bombadil
No.
song.
Was that Rufus Wainwright singing?
It was Rufus Wainwright.
Look, I love everybody involved. They messed up.
It's just not right. It's just all wrong.
It is a mistake to get Bear McCreary to write a Tom Bombadil song. I'm a fan of his work. He also has one lane. And he will force everything to be in that lane, whether it makes sense or not. And it does not make sense for Tom Bombadil to sing a dirge, basically, about Goldberry. What is that?
It's also is Goldberry around as
it's the River Daughter song that Tom Bombadil sings, but it's turned into the vibe is trailer music where you take a nursery rhyme and make it minor key. That is why
they had access to that material because they had access to they had the rights to the Lord of the Rings. But as far as I have seen, we have not seen Goldberry in any of the footage for the season. So why is he singing about the River Daughter?
I mean, maybe she's the big surprise. I still think I said this in an earlier episode. She's probably going to be the mystery box for his character, is trying to find her or something. Because there's they have no idea how to write a character that isn't in search of some kind of bullshit mystery. So
man. Weird.
Oh dear.
And
the show sucks.
We haven't even talked about Celebrimbor's weird little mirror moment or whatever the heck that is in the trailer, and then seeing things through a glass darkly or something.
The trailer is suddenly just apparently. If you haven't seen any of these things, what is apparently happening with second season is that they've decided that a lot of things are important that should have been important already. Mm-hmm. So you've got ominous lines about Eregion must not fall, and it's what is Eregion? You didn't even.
Yeah,
You didn't talk about that at all. Why? If it's so important, why isn't it in the first season? It technically is. You do see it, but it's not mentioned as a thing. It's just kind of some towers.
We don't get any sense of
what are the stakes
as a
here?
realm.
Yeah. Because I think partly because they don't know how to write, but also because they really so badly wanted Elrond to be the dwarf guy, the guy who knows the dwarves and hangs out with the dwarves. And you can't do that and have it make sense if you have established Eregion as being right there with Celebrimbor being the dwarf guy.
Baffling choice. Why did Elrond have to be
every choice?
I don't know.
And now we know that Kieran Hins' character is a dark wizard or something like that. And he appears for
what is that?
A 1-second shot in the second trailer, which is okay. But it's uninspiring. It's deeply uninspiring. It's all uninspiring.
We're lurching even further into some 16-year-old boys fanfic.
Yeah. Right.
It's
Galadriel in a cage.
The only people I see, I have seen a couple people just kind of online who are this feels like Tolkien, and then it is revealed that their entire experience of Tolkien is through the Peter Jackson movies. They have not read,
which is fair because some people that's what the extent of it will be. But
that's fine. But you don't actually know what is a sort of what constitutes a work of Tolkien. Let's say if you haven't actually read or listened to the audiobook,
That's
like,
reading.
That counts. Yeah. Like, you don't have to, with your eyes. You don't have to read the Silmarillion or anything. You should probably have at least read a couple of the books. I don't know, man.
It is a little bit weird. Like if your only experience with Moby Dick is watching a movie version of Moby Dick, you're not you're not equipped to have an opinion on, does it feel like Melville? Like, no, it doesn't. It feels like the movie version of Moby Dick.
Right. Right. And in as much as that seems to have been like a driving force of this entire thing anyway, let's, Bezos, etc. Let's give something that feels like the film version by Jackson of Lord of the Rings.
Yeah. I feel like, God, even at this point, it feels more than anything like the Jackson Hobbit movies. Not even the original trilogy. Yeah.
Yeah. I might have mentioned this before, I can't remember, but when I was like 13, I did start writing a piece of fanfic where like an elf is brought into like modern times because somebody's watching the opening of Fellowship of the Ring and drops their DVD player remote in like a bowl of chili or something, and like
I want to see this already.
And I was like not to toot my own horn, but that is inherently already more interesting than the Rings of Power.
Funny.
I just love the idea.
Too.
It says bowl of chili too. That is really great. I am all for this. So.
I don't know. I do think I did accidentally steal that idea from somebody else's like ancient thing on fanfiction.net. Because I think I mentioned it to somebody and they were like, oh, I read one like that. And I was like, oh, man. Anyway, this episode is not about Rings of Power.
Yes,
we should probably move on.
We'll move on.
The 2000s, but we'll leave it at that. So
what a time. What a time
indeed. So next episode, yes, we will have some initial thoughts. Forced or otherwise.
I mean, you guys might. I don't know.
Yeah.
Just recuse myself.
We'll see how extensive this actually gets. But in any event, it is time to move on to our main topic for the episode. That choice was Jared. So once again, Jared, the floor is yours.
This is going to be a really scattered... Not everybody necessarily knows what kind of summer I've had, but it's been a lot. So I'm hoping everything I'm about to say makes sense and is useful for an episode. It's been a lot, everybody. I've had a lot of stuff going on, and not all of it's been good. Anyway, but get back to Tolkien. So I never want to come across as a know-it-all. Whether I succeed is a different story. So I'm going to open this. Yeah, I'm going to open this by admitting I made a mistake in my terminology. In the last episode, I said I wanted to talk about the Avari. That's true. I do want to talk about the Avari. But I had forgotten that term very specifically is those who refused the Valar's call to Aman. It does not necessarily include the Wood Elves, who I used as an example in the last episode. There are Sylvan Elves who are Avari, but it's not all of them. It's complicated. I just know there was somebody who was listening to the end of the last episode and was like, oh my god, this idiot doesn't even know what the Avari are. Whatever. I made a mistake. I humbly beg your pardon. But here's a teachable moment. Like, who are the Avari?
Indeed.
In the legendarium, the elves first awakened at Cuivienen, which is just like a bay of the inland sea of Helgar or something like that. The Valar learned that the elves have appeared, and because Middle-earth is a dangerous place, but with Melkor building fortresses full of demons and all, the Valar decided it would be best if the elves could be brought to Valinor as a sort of soft play area. A lot of them agree to go, but a significant chunk of them are like, hell no, and that is a direct quote. You can quote me because I am quoting Tolkien, and they don't go on the journey at all. Other elves go, and some of them also decide to stay, like you drop out at various points. So you get elves who see the Misty Mountains and just nope out. Elves who see the ocean and are like, I can't do this. Elves who lose their leader and stay so they can find him. These are people like the Sylvan Elves, the Green Elves, the Sindar, probably others. There's just a complicated legendarium. Some of them get called the Nondor, the Unwilling, I think is what it... No, that's the Avari. Oh my god. Because let's add another name in there. Let's add Nondor in there too. Sure. None of those are Avari because they did intend to go to Valinor. They answered the call.
Right.
They were willing. And then after this, later migrations of the Avari from like the Cuivienen area do lead to some ambiguity. There's already ambiguity anyway because, like, for example, the difference between Sylvan Elves and Green Elves is academic. People will yell at me for that, but I'm right. Or at least I feel right. But ultimately, everyone who doesn't go to Valinor is lumped under the heading of Moriquendi, or Dark Elves, and that's kind of where they're left, at least in the Silmarillion, because despite its cosmic beginning with the music of the Ainur and all that, the Silmarillion is mostly the story of the Silmarils, which is a story of the Noldor, and to some extent the Sindar. And Lord of the Rings is not really a story of the elves at all, so it doesn't get into the technicalities of elven history. But at the same time, the Silmarillion drops this interesting hint and moves on. Once the Valar, they imprison Melkor, and then they're like, well, what do we do now? And the Silmarillion says they were divided in debate. For some, and of those Ulmo was the chief, held that the Quendi should be left free to walk as they would in Middle-earth, and with their gifts of skill to order all the lands and heal their hurts. But the most part feared for the Quendi in the dangerous world amid the deceits of the starlit dusk, and they were filled, moreover, with the love of the beauty of the elves, and desired their fellowship. At the last, therefore, the Valar summoned the Quendi to Valinor, there to be gathered at the knees of the powers in the light of the trees forever. And Mandos broke his silence, saying, so it is doomed. From this summons came many woes that afterwards befell. I should say so.
Indeed.
Yeah, and it doesn't get into much more depth than that, at least about this. The Avari are kind of these shadowy figures on the margin. Most of them aren't anywhere near Beleriand and aren't really involved or even aware of all the stuff that goes down there. And because the Silmarillion is Noldorin in origin, it's pretty ambivalent about the Avari. Sure, Ulmo was on their side, but they didn't learn how to make swords or writing or whatever. They're like the dolphins in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. They didn't invent anything except mucking about having a good time. There's a kind of, I want to say, there's a kind of suspicion inherent to the Silmarillion. Look at these uncivilized weirdos. What's their deal? And maybe we can tease out the distinction that may or may not exist between the Noldorin perspective and the authors. I don't know. But moving on, outside of the Silmarillion, there's a little more in the history of the Middle-earth series. For example, in Unfinished Tales, Mime the Dwarf calls the Avari wild elves, and there are scattered references to them being uncivilized, basically. But then the Nature of Middle-earth came out. Listen to our episode on that, and in there is a little more about them. Not much, but buried in all the math. And I mentioned the Valar not agreeing about the whole inviting elves to Valinor thing, and some of Nature of Middle-earth points out they appear to have made a mistake in deciding to do it. It's in the index under errors of the Valar. It's so funny. To a greater extent than the Silmarillion, I mean, is it's did they do the right thing? I don't know. So what ends up kind of coming across is that the Avari kind of seem to have instinctively a better understanding of their own purpose than the rulers of Arda. And the Nature of Middle-earth points out that the Valar's method of getting the elves to Valinor was dangerously close to coercion, which we can get into or not. I'm wrapping up, I swear. Another thing I want to mention is that the original elves, the first ones to awaken, are still around when this decision is made, and they think it's a terrible idea. And some of that is because Melkor has been whispering here and there and convincing some elves that Middle-earth is their realm, and the Valar just want to clear them out. But mostly these elves just don't see the point. They don't want to leave the place where they awakened. They see Middle-earth as their home. Why would they abandon the stars and open air for a closed-off land far away beyond unimaginable dangers? Imagine Adam and Eve sitting around going, crossing the Bering Land Bridge? No, thank you. So because of the original elves subjecting, the Avari also call themselves the seniors. At least in this version of the story, the Nation of Middle-earth is a pretty shifty little thing. I'm not sure how much of it should be relied on as canon, honestly. It's more anyway. And this leads us right back to the gap into which the Avari often fall. We just don't know much about them. They aren't the center of the story because they opted out of it. And what do you do with that? Drag them kicking and screaming into the limelight for a podcast episode, obviously. So there are a lot of things related to the Avari that I want to get into, but let's go sort of sideways for a second. So some guy with a giant horse shows up and tells you to follow him to a land of bliss and light that you can't even comprehend. Are you going?
I'd like to see some credentials first.
Right?
I probably am, because personally, and this is why, I am not an elf, and I really need to stress, but probably because I want light. This is so silly, but my in-laws, all of them, insist on not having lights on ever. It's you go there and it's just the darkest homes imaginable. The bulbs are 6 watts, and I crave light and sun, and even just I would take crappy fluorescent lighting, so I would desire the light of the trees personally. Yeah.
No wonder you're writing a horror movie set in Maine.
Right? Oh, inheriting a house you don't actually want. Interesting.
Well, based on the idea of wanting light in some form or another, yeah, I mean, obviously my I joke about credentials, but it's an interesting thought experiment. You have to place yourself in a thing where you can speak and you exist. And you found there's light in the sky thanks to someone you don't even know named Yavanna, who has made all these lovely...
Quick,
Varda.
Varda.
Oh, Varda, yes, excuse me.
People
yes.
will yell at you, so I just wanted to head them up with the fact.
Yavanna's down on the ground. Yavanna's on the ground. Varda has set all the lovely lights in the sky, so... I'll breath Gilthoniel. But with all that going on, the idea of someone coming in who, let's face it, also bespeaks violence. Why? He's the hunter.
Yeah.
Hi, what do you do? Oh, I go around killing things. Thanks.
Awesome. We'll follow you.
And obviously, again, the way the story is written says otherwise. But you're right. What is the counter narrative? And it's interesting in the course of our various episodes over time how we found elements of counter narratives sort of bubbling up around the fringes of Tolkien in various different ways and things. I won't go into all of them, but they do exist. They're there. Sometimes big and conceptually, like you mentioned, errors of the Valar. Sometimes the idea that looking at things from different perspectives. So to avoid this becoming total ramble, I think it would be one of those things that it's hard to put myself in that exact position, but in that sort of thing, I could understand the doubt. I could understand I just don't know. This is very new and unfamiliar to me. Why would I necessarily change from what I've got when what I've got seems to be working out well for me so far and is what I'm used to?
Yeah, and there's also, it's pointed out somewhere else, I can't remember. I should have extensive notes or whatever, but again, it's been a summer, you guys. Is that Melkor, he's been kind of whispering, sending little emissaries or whatever, and he's the what makes him so successful as a liar is that he rarely tells an outright lie. So he is correct when he's telling these elves, this is your realm. You were made for this land or whatever. We don't have verbatim text of what he says. It's not like we have his Twitter account or anything. But he's right. They are under... I see it kind of as they are understanding their purpose, and if it has been warped a little bit by Melkor, that's not their fault. They're still largely maybe correct.
There is also this group of elves that are largely, I think maybe even entirely Avari, that, the sort of fathers of the elves. There are these two fathers of the elves, not fathers, but I guess maybe second generation, I don't know, Morway and Norway, that, apparently their people were kind of settled further out from the main population, and so they did not see Orome firsthand. They weren't there, and so they didn't see even this guy who was yo, let me tell you, have I got a great place for you guys?
Own a timeshare on the shore.
Yeah, that's
to
them. That's
similar.
Probably what it sounded like. I don't know. And for whatever reason, you had these other three special elf guys who went and saw the light of the trees and came back and were no, it's for real. But for some reason, these guys weren't invited or refused to go. It's unclear, but it is understandable for these people to be I don't, what are you talking about? This.
Yeah. Yeah, and the whole guy riding up on a magical horse thing is I mentioned the Valar maybe getting close to coercion here. This is the nature of Middle Earth, so again, you got to be a little careful about well, this was the intent. We don't know. It's a lot of notes that aren't necessarily part of the finished vision, partly because there isn't a finished vision. But anyway, he talks in a different section that doesn't really have much to do with the Avari themselves about the Valar aren't allowed to coerce, and part of that is they can't show up as angelic powers and be look at us, we're so cool and powerful, you should do what we say because of how cool and powerful we are. And that part of the nature of Middle Earth, talking about the Avari again, is they got close to that accident. They didn't intend to, but just by showing up and being essentially gods, the elves were kind of oh, I guess we better listen.
God.
Maybe we don't have a choice.
Yeah.
We
and it
kind of
does
do,
seem
but
accidental. It does seem accidental originally.
But they also, the Valar really want them to come. And you know how sometimes if somebody really, really wants you to do something, you will just do it because you feel bad for them. You're so needy. Okay, fine. I'll do this thing. So again, you get into this issue of are they abusing their authority accidentally? And like, should they have made this call? And I think there's a huge, not a huge section, but like a huge undercurrent of like, they don't actually know what they're doing.
There's also the fact
to a certain extent they do.
Right,
but,
yeah. And there's also the fact from the Elves' point of view, and this is something where, again, as you noted, there's a question of how settled some of these stories are over time. I was rereading sort of the original, as close to the original version of the origin story as exists with the Book of Lost Tales earlier, and was reminded of the fact that in the original conception, Melkor was already stuck over in Valinor completely. They didn't go out and capture him and bring him back because he was already there. So when they emerge, and there's this whole much more longer sequence than is the Silmarillion about what it's like the Eldar are here, things like that. And so the pressure is more sort of the sense of, we need to bring them away to keep them safe from Melkor. They don't have to, because Melkor's already been captured, whereas in the final version, or at least as close to a final version with the Silmarillion, as such as the concatenation of everything, is the idea that sort of like, the Eldar are here, and Melkor's off doing this thing, so we better capture him now, and that causes all sorts of chaos and confusion. And they're like, what's that horrible thing off in the distance? And they're like unsettled and weird, and in the meantime, Melkor's sort of like, someone's arrived, and it's already going around directly. We get that idea of this is where the orcs are supposed to come from, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So we have this sort of fluid sense of what drives the Avari to aver, har har, and stay away. Thank you, I had to work that in. To choose to stay and stay away from this. So the motivation changes as Tolkien developed and reconsidered the story.
Yeah, it is interesting, Jared, taking this idea, the very valid idea of, the Silmarillion as, Noldorin in origin. And this is where we get that idea of the orcs were actually Avari. That's where, they were taken by Melkor and twisted and blah, blah, blah. And it is interesting, actually, thinking of, the motivations behind that framing. And, I was reading, I can't remember if this was in the Peoples of Middle-earth or the War of the... It's like this big volume of, like, Morgoth's Reign, the War of the Jewels. But so it's in one of those 10,000 pages where we have this idea that is brought forth of, like, some of the sort of Morroquendi who gradually moved a bit more westward. When they met the Teleri, they were just like, oh, hey, what's up? Like, it was much more harmonious, let's say, of a reunion, whereas the Noldor did everything they could to separate themselves from the kin that they had left behind. And I find that really interesting, even if that is something that Tolkien, going back to our episode about orcs, he seemed to not want to have that be the orcs' origin,
Yeah, he was super uncomfortable about
very uncomfortable with that, but that is an interesting little idea there.
Yeah, I think the Noldor come across as being very invested in their status as elves of the light, in a way that is like, I don't want to say casts doubt on their reliability as narrators, because I don't. It kind of does, but also like
it's more just
they're a little insecure in a way. Like they abandon it, and then they get to Middle Earth, and they're like, actually, maybe we could go back.
Yeah.
Well, something for your point there, Oriana. I think War of the Jewels is the one that has most of the info on that, because I was re-looking at that earlier. That has the mostly linguistic, deeply so, essay Kendi and Eldar.
Oh my god!
Yeah. So there's a lot you have to sort of plow through with that one. Believe me. Having said that, there is a very interesting descriptive section that gets into as much as we know in more detail about the Avari and various subsectors chapters of them, shall we say, as they end up in Beleriand.
So many subdivisions.
Yeah, and as they end up in Beleriand, and something that sort of leapt out was the fact that that Tolkien says, at least in terms of his description, that a lot of them are sort of like going like, yeah, we're pretty suspicious of you people, and we will ourselves stay apart from you because we're not buying it. And the idea is that they seem to be, quote unquote, self-consciously uncivilized. You don't get anybody going to Menegroth with this bunch. They're sort of like, we're living among the rocks and we're living among the caves and we're living among the trees and we're fine. And we're here. We sort of like they mentioned, like, there's the group of the Nandor that comes over and settles into Assyrian, but then everyone else is more like these small little groups that come up through the south, through Tarim Dweeneth, whatever that strange forest is, and they sort of just, float around and not do much. And with the Noldor, to raise that point, sort of their point of view, it's great because their perspective on the Noldor deal with them is sort of like, who are these people thinking they're so high and mighty? Essentially, it's sort of like, where do you get off? I mean, it's an inexact comparison, but dare I say, if the Noldor were the ones who escaped from their hometown and went off to the fancy college and all the rest of it, and then they came back for a visit.
Trying to put on airs.
Yeah. Like, sort of like, where do you get off?
It's like, I think, like, yeah, there is a part in that, whole thing where, the Morroquendi are like, well, that makes us think you didn't actually want to go in the first place because you came back. Like, you needed room to quarrel, basically, which is a sick burn. Yeah. Sick burn.
I did love that line. It's sort of like, you just wanted to argue.
Yeah. And you see a similar thing with I can't remember. I don't know if they're technically Avari, but like the original inhabitants of Lothlorien, like Nimrodel, is like when even the Sindar are around, she's like, what is wrong with you?
Can you chill?
Yeah, why you're just like inventing conflict? What?
It's that Vine where the girl is like,
where there's too much drama at school. All you gotta do is walk away. Yeah.
Oh my God, Jared! I hope the sketch is just that girl, but like an elf.
It's close. Okay, you'll see.
As the cover art is being worked on, we should say so. But I have to say this is not helping. This is not helping the idea that this is all secretly, Tolkien lifelong academic, silly, just making nothing and nothing academic novels. That this was all this was in the end. Oh no.
Like the War of the Jewels is vines.
Right.
Oh man, what have we gotten ourselves into? Let me throw out an idea though about how the fact that the Avari are mostly anonymous, essentially, is what they are. We get occasional mentions of certain people like Denethor, the original one, who was the prince or however is defined of the Nandor who falls in battle. I think in the first battle of Beleriand, the Battle Under Stars. I could be wrong. And the idea that again, it's mostly characters that are just the whole idea of Elves is so much in the sense of naming, having a name for yourself, which is a key element one could argue throughout all of Tolkien in various different ways and functions. Look at how Treebeard considers names and all that, which makes it interesting that the one sort of, you could say, thoroughly hardcore Avari I can think of that has a name is also one of the most evil as such, and that's Eol.
Yes, I was just thinking that. About him.
But is he one, though?
You see, that's what I couldn't remember.
There's a section, I think it's in Nature of Middle-earth, that's like, he technically wasn't. Like, he's like of the kindred of the Noldor or something, and he did stay behind. But he was willing to make the journey up to a point, and then he was like, actually, I'm gonna
and then just here. You tripled down on that.
Yeah, like I think there's some passage that specifically is like, no, he's not one of them, which is weird. Like that in itself is like, what is that doing? Why do we need to be that clear about this?
It may explain how the whole idea is that whereas the Avari, as they're otherwise lightly sketched out, don't seem to be like, tech types, for lack of a better term, Eol was the type of person who was sort of like, part of maker culture, clearly.
Yeah.
That's true. Yeah, like, he learned from the dwarves. Was that it?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's sort of like he was definitely not learning from Thingol and the bunch. He was sort of like he was sort of like keeping separate away. Which if the fact that he ultimately was Noldor in origin makes the whole thing with Turgon's sister and that and everything and all that. So just sort of like an interrelated mess.
Just so much family drama. So much family drama.
So much, yes, and eventually meets his fate. But yeah, it ties in with what Jared was saying. The idea that we're getting things from essentially a Noldorin point of view. That most of the figures on, you could say, the Avari side sector, everyone find it, are again anonymous. We don't know who they are. We don't get a sense of any survivors from that time. We don't even know the idea of there are people who have basically been there the entire stretch of time across the all three ages who have seen everything. If they exist in Mirkwood, if they exist in Lorien, they're never centered. They're never named. We don't get any perspectives from that. We get the perspectives of Galadriel, sure, but imagine what a perspective of someone who had been just an elf who was sort of been just existing in the Vales of Anduin while everything was happening over in Beleriand, and then eventually sort of things came in there and like, what? Okay, and then sort of things go around. It's like, I'm in this war now. That would be a very interesting perspective to have, but we don't have it. I don't think we have anything even really close to it. So
no, I mean, part of that is similar to how we don't have like perspectives from the Haradrim or whatever. It's like they're not the people telling the story. They're just not involved in that.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. I don't know how telling it is as a detail, but like they don't invent writing.
Yeah.
They just they're an oral culture. So what's up with that? There's so many unanswered and unanswerable questions about them, but I think that's why we don't get their POV, is they're just not writing anything down. But
they ain't literate.
But also, I mean, part of me wonders, and again, I don't think answerable unless there's some bit of lore I haven't come across, which there's always more. What are they doing all day? Like,
right?
What are they up to?
How much agriculture? Like, is it agriculture? Are they just hunting and gathering? Are they all vegetarian?
Yeah.
Well,
what are they doing?
I mean, this leads into sort of a comparison point I was just starting to turn around. Might as well sort of put it forward there. It's interesting how, for, let's say, lack of a better term, that we have Tolkien has thoughts in these indirect ways on, you could say, fringes, a non-formally organized, quote-unquote, civilized society for the elves and the hobbits and men.
Yeah.
In all cases, he has examples of them that emerge or sort of like are suggested there one way or another. We did one of our earliest episodes was, of course, on Gone Bury Gone. These people who exist very much on the fringe of, quote unquote, civilized society, however defined, both Rohan and Gondor. It's sort of like, well, what are they doing? What are they doing all day? How do they exist? A similar sort of question can be asked. With the hobbits, the idea is sort of like, we're all settled here in our shire. What happened before? Well, we were wandering and we were sort of grouped without really organization.
We put a lot of twigs in our hair, apparently.
Oh, God!
Do not take Rings of Power as canon, people. But the idea is that yes, there were wandering times. There were like ill-defined groups and settlements on the Anduin and other areas, things like that. So it's interesting because, of course, Tolkien, in his own particular viewpoint, seems to have so idealized the Shire, this balance between no control and yet some sort of organization, whereas these other groups I've outlined were a little bit beyond that because they hadn't quite, quote unquote, gotten to that point yet. So it's an interesting sort of thing. He doesn't hate them by any means, but he regards them with a slightly sense of there is a distinct difference, and I don't think he ever intentionally nails anything down about any of them. So that leaves the Avari as the ones who, will theoretically live for millennia and just see through it all and say, what indeed do you do all day? Do you just simply exist, tell stories, etc.? There's the idea that the Avari are the ones who teach mankind how to speak.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There are teachers. They are willing to exchange. They're not just simply just ignoring them. So it's not like they don't have any lore or anything. They clearly do.
No,
and they clearly pass on things, and they're not just simply totally separating themselves from their closest kindred, essentially.
Yeah. That does, again, we're getting into kind of unanswerable things here, but it makes me wonder how this intersects with the idea of elves like fading or diminishing because they are supposed to give way to humans.
Yeah.
What do they know about that? What do they think about that? Like, Galadriel has a very specific perspective on diminishing, like, to her.
Right.
Anything other than what she is almost a punishment. But, like, what do the other elves think about it? The ones who didn't go to Valinor and learn anything.
Who told them?
Yeah.
At what point did they discover that this was a thing that would happen to them, possibly?
Yeah.
You know, what actually does happen to their bodies physically, or their spirits? I'm sure that the fading of the spirit is much more noticeable.
Yeah.
Has it happened to any of them? Like, I know it's been a very, very long time, but, you know, they have just kind of been living that free and easy lifestyle. You know, at least those, like, way to the far east, who kind of haven't, even the ones that kind of didn't cross the Misty Mountains, they were probably living pretty free and easy for a while.
Yeah, because if you're far enough away from Beleriand, it doesn't, like, there's no Balrogs or orcs or, like, there's nothing there, because Melkor is so focused on his own thing. Like, you could do whatever, it doesn't even matter. But yeah, like, there's this, what makes this a frustrating topic also is that he waffles a lot, Tolkien waffles about what the actual, what's the plan here? What are we doing? So you end up with, like, no, the elves do have to leave Middle-earth and go to Valinor, or they will fail.
Right.
And it's like, do the Avari know that?
Are you sure about that? Are you sure, first of all?
Is this just what the Noldor think? Like, what is the goal here? Were they originally, like, would they have ended up in Valinor ultimately anyway,
right.
Like once they had repaired the hurts or whatever there was they were supposed to be doing, like what?
Yeah, did it like here? It was there going to be just kind of a it's not even like a rapture, but just like a rapturing of the spirits of the elves, and then there's just all these dead just dead bodies.
It's time to go.
Like, oh god,
getting doom laden here. Well, one could argue that there's a way we see how this functions in Lord of the Rings itself to a certain extent, with the idea that when Legolas gets to the sea, a trigger is switched.
Yeah. Yes.
And so the immediate implication is that then he just the seagulls haunt his brain ever since until he finally says, "I gotta go," and he does. So does that imply that if that doesn't happen for everyone else back in Mirkwood, they don't care?
Right.
And related to that, we have in the form of the two extant, realms, you could say. Well, direct realms, though, there is a sense of, one's a former monarchy, and the other one is, Galadriel and the purse keeping an eye on things in the absence of monarchy. But we have Thranduil, and then we have them, and in both cases, the feeling is definitely one of higher elves coming over, and we're in charge. I'm like, how peaceful was that transition, actually?
Right.
And what do people there think?
when Galadriel and Celeborn come into Lothlorien and then eventually just kind of take over, we get a sense that after their lord departed, they wanted Galadriel, and it's like, because I get the feeling Galadriel's the one telling us this. Did they actually?
No, I swear they wanted me to be Lady of the Wood.
This is the history of Ireland is written by an English person, it sounds like to me, but I don't think that's what Tolkien really intended, but maybe.
No. I don't think he saw that kind of like politicking as being part of elvish nature. So
presumably, but it is interesting that Thranduil essentially comes in. The idea is a refugee from Doriath and wanted to recreate Menegroth in a smaller scale over there, and it's sort of like,
okay,
did the elves there feel like they had to do that?
Right? Where did he get the labor for this exactly?
Sure, Menegroth will do that. I guess, whatever the hell that is.
Yeah, what are you talking about? Why? I don't like being under the ground. I like being up where there's trees and stuff.
I want to see the star.
Yeah.
So, there shrewd questions can be raised.
It also, my little, that's probably why elves have such good eyesight is because they came to being when it was dark as shit outside. So their eyes are just
Good
like,
point.
designed to see in low light environments.
They're like owls.
Yeah.
Elves in dark mode. So,
Yeah.
I'm telling you.
I don't think that was like intentional. I think
No.
I don't.
No.
But that's my little like, aha! I see.
But what if?
It could go. I mean, I will say this. There is something about how, again, you could argue that ultimately the three kindreds, as they make their way across to Valinor, is a certain form of essentialism going on. Like, the Vanir are like, yep, we're going, da-da-da-da-da. They all just go there doing thing. And the Noldor mostly do the same. And the Teleri are just sort of like, well, And again, the
We'll
terms...
get there when we get there.
Yeah.
I don't know.
This
the
is very
terms are-
South American coded.
Well,
I can say
this.
this. I was just with a whole bunch of family members from Venezuela. Venezuelan time, a little different.
We've heard it here.
Yeah.
And if you do ever read Book of Lost Tales, if you haven't, keep in mind the names of the kindreds drift, shall we say. So you might be like, wait, is this? It's like, there's a lot going on. But I do like the idea that there is that Tolkien has a built-in recognition that's sort of like, no, you can't really organize everybody. No matter how hard you try. The closest
A
thing
2/3 majority is as close as you're going to get.
Yeah. And if people leave, should you be surprised that they leave? And it's sort of like, the idea is sort of like a bunch of people come, what do you do? We have to cross these huge mountains, like the Misty Mountains even told them. They're like,
No,
I
I
don't want to do that.
No, I don't. You're not the boss of me.
It's sort of like, big mountains and this big broad river, and things are seemingly fertile and all those. I think we're just fine right here, just sort of
Right?
I love this river. It's great. We can just sit here and eat fruit. It's fine.
Yeah. Again, before the sun, so moon fruit or whatever. Not even that.
Well,
Star
before the moon.
fruit. Star fruit. That is interesting that things grew before the sun.
Yeah.
I know there was at least some mention of the idea that Yavanna had kept things in sleep mode essentially for a while there. So, but and all that, and then of course, and then if I remember right, I think the idea is that the aren't the Avari essentially the ones who teach the Ents how to speak? Am I getting that right?
I don't think it's ever. It might be said somewhere that I missed, but I know at least in Lord of the Rings, Treebeard is like the elves taught us to talk.
Yeah.
Which is
okay.
not
So
this.
might be
It
them,
could be
might not
anybody.
them. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Depending on how far back
Yeah.
go.
Who can say?
And where the Ents kind of
And where
originated.
Yeah. Which I guess could be anywhere. We don't know.
But yeah, I mean, I suppose the other thing too is that you get a sense that the Avari are kind of the last elves standing. And when you see what's played out in the appendices to Lord of the Rings, and it's not quite dismissive. It's more just sort of like, that's a shame, because the idea is that only in Lorien, there's only a sad remnant of the people remain after after Galadriel, and then eventually the Purse, who stays for a while, and all that.
What a bizarre marriage they have.
Look, they're on a different time scale. It's basically just like taking separate vacations.
I suppose, and so there's the sense that this, the idea that these are the diminished remnant, and they're the ones who eventually did not go back to Valinor and ultimately rejected. So there's sort of a tragic falling off is implied that that they just sort of end up being they really do fade. There's nothing there, and that just seems it's very sad is what it is. And if you read it that way, it's something that's sort of like, geez, and the reasons could be numerous. So as to what it is, we can only speculate.
I think that kind of maybe starting to get into wrap-up territory here, but
get into it.
There's this kind of getting back to the issue of the Valar is like, what do they see as their mission? And why do they think that having elves out in the world is a bad idea? And you see that, they explicitly go to war against Melkor to imprison him so that the world is safe for the elves. And then they're still like, but just in case, you better come with us.
It's real helicopter parenting.
It is a bit. We've mentioned this in probably at least once an episode, but there's this continuous pattern in the legendarium of good people with the best of intentions being like, okay, time to isolate. We're not going to be out there helping anybody because we got to put on our own oxygen mask and then stop there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You see where the masks are. You can help yourself. It's fine. And this is the first instance of that where the Valar are like, first of all, we're going to make Valinor. We're going to wall ourselves off from the rest of the world. This is pretty great. We should share this with other people on an invite-only basis. And like that already, their isolation is, I think, called out as a probable mistake because they're supposed to be in charge of the world. They're not supposed to be hiding themselves. And then when the elves come along, they're like, well, we just love them so freaking much, which is okay. I guess that's a reason that we just need to have them around. And it does turn into helicopter parenting. And like, what is the goal? What should the goal be here? What is the role of power and goodness together in the world?
Right.
Like,
does it always just turn into the need or desire for control? Because that's like, you know, kind of what it is. It's okay. We set up this little soft play.
Benevolent control, but still.
But it's like, but you know, if you just did this, things would be great.
Yeah.
Like, if you just do this, if you come here, everything will be great. Look, come on. And like, you know, that's like the more sort of beneficial sort of way of doing things versus like Melkor and Sauron's sort of way of total domination. This is more just like control in the form of guidance.
Yeah, we're going to supervise your playtime.
Yeah, it's like, it's just, I think that there are a lot of parents out there who see their children as extensions of themselves and have real difficulty. And I'm not saying that the Valar are exactly like that, but I think there is probably some element of that where it's like, no, you guys, you're just so great. I just like that level of
love
like,
you so much.
I just love you so much. I can't stand to see anything bad happen to you. I can't stand to see you make bad decisions, which means you can't make any decisions on your own.
Which, I mean, they do.
Yeah,
they are better than Melkor. They are like, you know, this is a bad idea. If you want to make swords, you can, but you probably shouldn't.
If you want to leave Valinor, you can, but you shouldn't.
But then they do that whole thing where they're like, well, then you can't come back.
You're punished now.
Which again, I think it's the nature of Middle-earth. Somebody is like, that probably was the wrong call to make.
not correct. Like,
yeah, no, you kind of went against the will of Eru there.
Means the original orphans who wandered off in the woods on their own are doing just fine.
Yeah,
maybe.
Anyway, and I think that's kind of where I end up, is this, like, they are in a way representative of the failures of the good powers of the world.
All right, the choice of episode topic has come back around to me, and as we mentioned at the start of the episode, that huge 3-volume collected poems thing of Tolkien is coming out, and we are not going to talk about that because it is too darn long.
I was so afraid for a second.
Oh
you
my
had
God.
me going. I was like,
I thought Ned was doing a little trick.
I'm not getting the 3-volume set.
No. It's not that we might not get things eventually or whatever, or things like that in his own time, but let's look, all the stuff that's supposed to be in there, no. You know, there's a reason why we've never done an episode on The Lord of the Rings. I mean, duh. You know, this might be as long.
Well, there goes my next episode idea. God.
So sorry. However, there is something, and we mentioned this in the news a couple of episodes ago, that is coming out in a republished form, which is actually kind of perfectly timed for this, because talking about all the collected poems, no. However, there is the one book of poetry that Tolkien published while he was alive, and it is a very interesting artifact for several reasons. It is his last big formally published thing that had anything more or less specifically to do with Middle-earth. It is one of his collaborations with Pauline Baynes, his favorite illustrator, and it's indeed it is all poetry as opposed to any particular prose, aside from, you could say, notes. And that is the I can't remember the year it came out, but in the 60s, the collection The Adventures of Tom Bombadil, which is now out in republished in its critical edition, which came out a few years ago, so you can now look for it more readily in a paperback form, I believe, which has notes and explanations editing from the famed team of Wayne Hammond and Christina Scull. So do consider doing some reading on that. Again, the illustrations alone, Pauline Baynes doing the work, and we will talk about that next time. And there we go. So, not much more to add beyond that, except to say, we will be coming back to you in October. By that time, as noted, we'll have a few episodes under our belt of a certain thing to maybe acknowledge. But we will talk about Tom Bombadil more, or at least the things. And a quick reminder too that thanks to Oriana picking this topic, we did do a straight up Tom Bombadil episode a while back. Give that a re-listen so we can have some thoughts on the character himself. But if you're not familiar with this poetry book, it is not simply solely stories of Tom Bombadil. There's a lot more going on. That's another reason why it's very interesting. It is, in some respects, a nearly unique thing that Tolkien did that has something to do with legendarium, and not quite, but we'll get into that more later on. So, thank you, as always, very much for listening. We do appreciate it. Again, we can be reached at bythebywater@gmail.com. Our webpage is megaphonic.fm/bythebywater, where our episode guide and much more can be found. And By the Bywater is our handle on Blue Sky, where the three of us can also be found individually and on other spots in social media as well. So feel free to reach out, follow, etc., and all the other good stuff. Next time, we'll come to you. We'll have more stories of things, as mentioned, stuff like that. And who knows? We may get to report about seeing this wonderful new cat, but we'll let you know at the time. Until then, thanks very much. Talk to you next time.